Hey everybody, this is Jacob from RoboFlow. I'm here with Matt from RoboFlow to talk about the difference between missing and unannotated data and why you should care about it. So, Matt, why don't you go ahead and kick us off with what you see as the difference between null and missing?
Yeah, so when it comes to computer vision, there's a pretty big difference between missing and null annotations. And in fact, in all of data science, if you're doing statistics or machine learning or anything, there's also a really big difference between missing data and data that we're marking as null. So to provide a couple of definitions, when we think about images, for example, that are null, that means there's not an object of interest in that image. So let's say you're building a model that's supposed to detect something, like you want to be able to build out an American Sign Language detector, and you're able to look at somebody's fist or their hand and understand what is the letter that's being used in there. Well, you might take a bunch of pictures of that and you want to annotate those images. Let's say, though, that there's one of those images that doesn't have a fist or a hand in that image at all. That would be an example of an image you would want to mark as null because there are no objects in there. There's the image, but it's just empty of any objects of interest. Missing, on the other hand, is something different. So when it comes to images, we might think of this as unannotated. So when you upload your data to RoboFlow or some other platform, when you do that, let's say that you had an image where you had done the letter, I'm going to try and make the letter M in American Sign Language. And when you do that, when you upload that, if it's not yet annotated, then your computer probably isn't going to know the difference between null images and images where you just haven't gotten around to annotating them yet. So that's the difference between null images, where there's not actually something in the image that should be marked, and then there's unannotated or missing data, where you've got images where there's stuff in there that should be annotated, but those annotations for some reason or another are just missing.
That definitely makes sense, and it definitely seems like kind of an important distinction to be making as you're working through and like putting your data sets together. That sometimes you have something that's missing, or sometimes you have it null, and you probably want to keep track of those distinctions. So I'm kind of curious. Have you do you have any? I know this is definitely applicable to computer vision, but probably to data science at large too. Do you have any cases in your data science career where you've ran into examples of the difference between null and missing, and when you're constructing some sort of data science model?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would go so far as to say that everybody who has done data science in really any way has probably dealt with missing data before in some regard, because it just comes up so frequently. So there are some examples that come to mind. One of the most common examples is surveys. So when it comes to people not responding to survey questions, like a questionnaire. So for example, maybe somebody fills out a survey and they choose to, let's say that there's 3 questions on this survey. We'll make it simple. There's question 1, what is your name? Question 2, what is your age? Question 3, what is your income? Well, maybe some people fill out some of that information. Maybe they share their age and they share their name, but maybe they don't share their income. They just, for whatever reason, feel uncomfortable sharing that income with you. We might think of that information as missing data. Let's say that there's somebody else who is administered the survey, but they don't answer any of the questions. For example, maybe it's a telephone survey, and so I call somebody's house and they just don't pick up the phone. So they don't answer questions 1, 2, or 3. There's a couple of in the weeds terms that we use to describe the distinction between those, but I think that is a good example of the difference here, especially when we're thinking about images or when we're thinking about data science. What is the difference between missing and null? That person who did not respond to the survey at all, that's just like a null example here. Whereas that person who responded to question 1 and question 2, but not question 3, we might think of that data as missing. The reason that I bring that up is, let's say that you, Jacob, are the data scientist here, and you go ahead and you want to do an analysis of what is the average income in this data set. Well, there's three types of answers. There's the people who responded, there's the people who were asked but just chose to not respond. And then there's the people who were never asked the question because maybe they didn't respond to the survey at all. They never got the survey. Well, when it comes to taking the average or taking the median or any sort of data science stuff you want to do with that column of data in Excel or in a pandas data frame or in R or whatever, those missing values are going to look the same, but they're actually different because one of them, they never got asked the question, and another group, they got asked the question but chose to not respond. The last thing I want to share here is, why does that matter? Well, there's a really big difference between someone who just doesn't respond to the survey and somebody who's responded to some of the survey questions and said, I want to opt out of this particular question. Maybe in that case, the people who answered question 1, their name, question 2, their age, but not question 3, maybe that person is less likely to share their income because they think it violates some privacy concerns, or they don't know how the data are going to be used. Maybe they don't share that information because their salary or their income is a lower income on average, and so they just don't want to share it. Now, that's something that we don't know, and that makes it really hard in data science to try and understand that. But that distinction between missing values and null values is really important. It pops up in a lot of different places, whether it's with surveys or with images or something else.
Definitely. Yeah, that is an interesting distinction, and that lack of data in the income field there, I can definitely see how it can mean different things based on different contexts. And the other thing I'm kind of thinking about as you're talking through this example is that it must have been it can be like kind of a pretty tedious process to wrangle all these data fields and figure out what each one means. Would you say that was the case?
Yeah, absolutely. There's all sorts of issues with that because you don't necessarily know why that value is missing in a lot of cases. So it's important for us to use whatever information we have. So with that income example, when I said earlier that there are perhaps people who have lower incomes are less likely to share their income. That is an example of something that in statistics, we call it missing not at random, where whether or not that thing is missing depends on the value of that missing thing itself. But as a data scientist or a statistician or anybody, you don't know why that's missing because you don't know the value of the thing itself. And it almost feels like a chicken and egg problem. It's missing, but because it's missing, you can't really do a whole lot to investigate why that's the case. So it gets really, really complicated. And in my experience, a lot of the techniques to handle that tend to be really, really advanced, super theoretical, super advanced. It's hard to deal with that properly. One of the easiest ways that we can try and handle that is if you're working in a situation like the survey example I shared, where some people answered some questions, but not all, and other people just maybe didn't respond to that survey at all, or other people might have just not been contacted, or rather contact was not made. Maybe I called somebody, but they just never picked up the phone, so they didn't have the chance to respond to the survey. What we might do in those cases is trying to add a flag or an indicator that says, we did make contact versus we didn't make contact. Because again, it's very, very different if you call somebody and they just don't answer, so they never get asked the questions. You call them and you ask a question and they don't answer any of them, or you call them and they answer some, but not all of them. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different challenges here. And so by being able to proactively mark an observation as missing for a reason versus null for some reason, like I wasn't able to make contact, that can make it much, much easier for you to clean up some of that data and get better insights into what you're working with.
Definitely. It's almost like that example is almost like the 50 shades of null and unannotated. The nice thing though is in the context of computer vision, Matt and I are excited to share with you that at RoboFlow we've automated a lot of this process of identifying something as null or an image as null or unannotated, where it's a little bit more black and white in that either you've visited your image and you've decided there's actually nothing to detect there, there's no objects to detect, and so you've marked it as null, or you haven't gotten to the image yet and it's in an unannotated bucket. And this sort of distinction is useful as you're working through your computer vision data set. So you can kind of see, you can put things into different buckets, and it's a little bit more of a bifurcated distinction that we've created at RoboFlow and in other labeling tools. But we're excited to kind of bring this feature to you, and we've also put together a video this week that we'll be releasing in tandem with this video that you can check out on how to use our Null tool on your computer vision data sets. So we're excited for that. And I guess before we wrap up here, Matt, do you have any other closing thoughts on the topic? And
I think the biggest thing is that one of the reasons that we're rolling out this feature is due to product feedback, working with people, users who say, "Hey, this is great, but there's that challenge," or "This is a good product, and I wish we had this." And so, just trying to be responsive to that information, because it's really helpful for us to know that, and we want to be able to be as responsive as possible and be like, you're right, that's a great idea. Let's roll this feature out. So I know that, like you mentioned, we're really excited to be able to launch this and to share it with everyone. And we know that we're going to get a lot of use out of it, and we hope that you do as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we're always trying to make things easier. So as you find features like this, just let us know. And thanks for listening to us today, talking about null versus unannotated, and hopefully you can keep your data sets in order and catch us on the next YouTube video. So see you, everybody.